Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. Without further ado, returning to The Invisible Man as read by Lord Naren White. Emerging into the hill road, Kemp naturally took the downward direction. And so it was. He came to run in his own person, the very race he had watched with such a critical eye from the Belvedere study only 4 days ago. He ran it well, for a man out of training, and though his face was white and wet, his wits were cool to the last. He ran with wide strides, and wherever a patch of rough ground intervened, wherever there came a patch of raw flints or a bit of broken glass shone dazzling, he crossed it and left the bare invisible feet that followed to take what line they would. For the first time in his life, Kemp discovered that the hill road was indescribably vast and desolate, and that the beginnings of the town far below at the hill foot were strangely remote. Never had there been a slower or more painful method of progression than running. All the gaunt villas sleeping in the afternoon sun looked locked and barred. No doubt they were locked and barred by his own orders. But at any rate, they might have kept a lookout for an eventuality like this. The town was rising up now. The sea had dropped out of sight behind it, and people down below were stirring. A tram was just arriving at the hill foot. Beyond that was the police station. Was that footsteps he heard behind him? Spurt. The people below were staring at him. One or two were running. And his breath was beginning to saw in his throat. The tram was quite near now, and the Jolly Cricketers was noisily barring its doors. Beyond the tram were posts and heaps of gravel, the drainage works. He had a transitory idea of jumping into the tram and slamming the doors. And then he resolved to go for the police station. In another moment he had passed the door of the Jolly Cricketers and was in the blistering, queer end of the street with human beings about him. The tram driver and his helper, arrested by the sight of his furious haste, stood staring with the tram horses unhitched. Further on, the astonished features of navvies appeared above the mounds of gravel. His pace broke a little, and then he heard the swift pad of his pursuer, and leapt forward again. "The Invisible Man!" he cried to the navvies, with a vague indicative gesture, and by an inspiration leapt the excavation and placed a burly group between him and the chase. Then, abandoning the idea of the police station, he turned into a little side street, rushed by a greengrocer's cart, hesitated for the 10th of a second at the door of a sweetstuff shop, and then made for the mouth of an alley that ran back into the main hill street again. 2 or 3 little children were playing here, and shrieked and scattered at his apparition, and forthwith doors and windows opened, and excited mothers revealed their hearts. Out he shot into Hill Street again, 300 yards from the tram line end, and immediately he became aware of a tumultuous vociferation and running people. He glanced up the street towards the hill. Hardly a dozen yards off ran a huge navvy, cursing in fragments and slashing viciously with a spade, and hard behind him came the tram conductor with his fists clenched. Up the street others followed these two, striking and shouting. Down towards the town, men and women were running, and noticed clearly one man coming out of a shop door with a stick in his hand. "Spread out! Spread out!" cried someone. Kemp suddenly grasped the altered condition of the chase. He stopped and looked around, panting. "He's close here," he cried. "Form a line across." He was hit hard under the ear and went reeling, trying to face round towards his unseen antagonist. He just managed to keep his feet, and he struck a vain counter in the air. Then he was hit again under the jaw and sprawled headlong on the ground. In another moment, a knee compressed his diaphragm, and a couple of eager hands gripped his throat. But the grip of one was weaker than the other. He grasped the wrists, heard a cry of pain from his assailant, and then the spade of the navvy came whirling through the air above him and struck something with a dull thud. He felt a drop of moisture on his face. The grip at his throat suddenly relaxed with a convulsive effort. Kemp loosed himself and grasped a limp shoulder and rolled uppermost. He gripped the unseen elbows near the ground. "I've got him!" screamed Kemp. "Help! Help! Hold! He's down! Hold his feet!" In another second, there was a simultaneous rush upon the struggle, and a stranger, coming into the road, suddenly might have thought an exceptionally savage game of rugby football was in progress. There was no shouting after Kemp's cry, only a sound of blows and feet and heavy breathing. Then came a mighty effort, and the invisible man threw off a couple of his antagonists and rose to his knees. Kemp clung to him in front like a hound to a stag, and a dozen hands gripped and clutched and tore at the unseen. The tram conductor suddenly got the neck and shoulders and lugged him back. Down went the heap of struggling men again and rolled over. There was, I am afraid, some savage kicking. Then suddenly a wild scream of "Mercy! Mercy!" that died down swiftly to a sound like choking. "Get back, you fools!" cried the muffled voice of Kemp, and there was a vigorous shoving back of stalwart forms. "He's hurt, I tell you, stand back!" There was a brief struggle to clear a space, and then the circle of eager faces saw the doctor kneeling, as it seemed, 15 inches in the air, and holding invisible arms to the ground. Behind him, a constable gripped invisible ankles. Don't you leave go of him," cried the big navvy, holding a blood-stained spade. "He's shamming." "He's not shamming," said the doctor, cautiously raising his knee, "and I'll hold him." His face was bruised and already going red. He spoke thickly because of a bleeding lip. He released one hand and seemed to be feeling at the face. "The mouth's all wet," he said, and then, "Good God!" He stood abruptly and then knelt down on the ground by the side of the thing unseen. There was a pushing and shuffling, a sound of heavy feet as fresh people turned up to increase the pressure of the crowd. People now were coming out of the houses. The doors of the Jolly Cricketers stood suddenly wide open. Very little was said. Kemp felt about, his hand seeming to pass through empty air. "He's not breathing," he said, and then, "I can't feel his heart, his side, ugh!" Suddenly an old woman, peering under the arm of the big navvy, screamed sharply. "Looky there," she said, and thrust out a wrinkled finger. And looking where she pointed, everyone saw, faint and transparent as though it was made of glass, that the veins and arteries and bones and nerves could be distinguished. the outline of a hand limp and prone. It grew clouded and opaque even as they stared. "Hello!" cried the constable. "Here's his feet a showing." And we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching and I hope you enjoy. Please like, comment, and subscribe as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care and thanks again.